Hey everyone, happy Sunday to you. I hope all is well. Time is just cruising along. We're already in week 6, so you should have a handle on how this course is going as far as grades go, how the grading is, how the structure is. As I mentioned in many videos before, this class is on repeat now, right? On a 4-week rotation. DB quiz, DB paper. DB quiz, DB paper. And so, as you found out this week, your DBs are just summaries of your papers after the week 5, week 10, week 15, I think it is, I guess, 14. Um, yeah, so that's all it is, week 13, it looks like. So all that is just you summary of your paper, so that should be a super easy week. You've already done the work. Um, this week, we move on to from 12-step work. I'm going to wrap up 12-step work here in a few minutes, but I want to move on ahead real quick to co-occurring disorders. And I mentioned in the video for 1305 that it really does correlate these two courses together. So I know all but like one of you are taking both at the same time, and the one that's not's already taken this course. So yeah, it goes hand in hand. So you're talking about assessment and diagnosis in 1305 and co-occurring disorders this week, chapter 25. You'll have a quiz this week. As I mentioned there, it's important that we know these, we recognize these, and we can understand these and the symptoms and the characteristics and behaviors associated with them. We don't diagnose them as LCDCs. We should be able to, but we don't, right? We strictly remain to the substance use disorder is always going to be our diagnosis as LCDCs. So the following week, you have a DB4 due on treatment settings from chapter 13. Now, I'll do a video on that one as well for sure, because I worked at a treatment center for 8 years. I work very closely with treatment centers today. I'm very pro-treatment. If you hadn't figured that piece out by now, and I don't just because I'm pro-treatment doesn't mean my clients are pro-treatment, right? And it doesn't mean everybody's right for treatment. But I do believe in the philosophy. I do believe in having that structured, safe environment is a critical piece, or can be a critical piece for people. Then you have your SMART recovery paper, and we're halfway through at that point. SMART is the antithesis of 12-step work, right? It's the complete opposite. And we'll talk more about that as we get there. Then you have your spring break. So you should have a really, once you do that week 8, you got a spring break, and then your DB just summarizing your paper. So you really do have a couple easy weeks right there to give you some sort of breather here. So as we wrap up 12-step work, right, the philosophy is they believe in the medical model, right? You have this disease. You have the disease that hijacks your brain. Most research supports that. I will take that to my grave on a personal note that that's a thing. When my brain gets hijacked, I lose power of choice, and that is seemingly out of my control. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that here in a second, but they believe you come in here to these meetings, to this support. You share your experience, strength, and hope with others, and you get that from others. You work this 12-step model of living, and at the end of the day, the model is simply be a good human being, right? Take accountability for your own behavior. Where you make mistakes with others, make it right correctly. You kind of, and part of that step work is you make amends to people where you can in the past and where you were in the wrong. You take ownership of your behaviors. Part of that process, you practice acceptance on the things you can't change, which is everybody else in the world, things, places, people, all the things. You find a higher power, God, higher power, whatever you choose to do there, and then you continue to live that life by giving back to others, right? And that's their philosophy in a nutshell. And it's not a bad philosophy. It's not a philosophy for everyone. So a couple of things I took out from some of your papers or readings were, first, they were really good. I really enjoyed reading about your experiences. Overall, I gave you all each individual feedback. I won't comment on your DBs. Because again, the idea was I gave you individual feedback on your papers, and you just the DBs are more for peer interaction. But that said, you'll get the points if you did them right. You won't if you don't. That kind of thing. But a couple of things. 12-step work is it's a wonderful philosophy for a number of reasons. I also feel it can be very antiquated for a number of reasons. Learn the history of these programs. The history of AA in a nutshell came from, it was founded in the 1930s by Dr. Bob Smith and Bill Wilson. Before that, though, there's a little bit of history, right? They're called the Washingtonians and the Oxford groups. This program, in my opinion, came right out of the Bible. Not really my opinion, it came right out of the Bible. If you do enough history and digging, you'll see that. The reason they switched it Bill W. switched it from God to God as you understand him, or higher power, is because he wanted to be all inclusive, right? Which makes sense. This is why I've talked with some of you, or mentioned to some of you, did a little video even about the language we use. So I get taken to task most semesters on this when I start talking about language, and people feel like I'm coddling people. And look, my colleagues would tell you, my reputation in this industry is one that's two things. I fly straight as an arrow, meaning I'm ethical. I don't bend the rules. I maybe occasionally where I can, but nothing outlandish by any stretch. I'm an ethical counselor. I believe that's my reputation, and that's what I have. Two is I'm very direct. I'm direct with love, but I'm still very direct. That's my style of helping. That's all I know how to do. It's just what comes natural to me. I didn't set out to be that way. It's just what comes natural. So I'm not afraid to say something to somebody is what I'm getting to here, right? I don't believe in everybody gets a trophy and that kind of thing. And if you do, great. That doesn't mean we can agree to disagree on some things, right? We're humans. That should be a thing. And we're never going to all agree on everything. So I'm not about, I think coddling can be helpful, nurturing, absolutely. But it can also be hurtful at a point, right? So where do you draw that line of being too direct versus too nurturing, right? It's kind of what I'm getting at. And some students, I remember one in particular wrote me this long email about, I needed to be told I was an alcoholic. I needed to be told I was an addict. And you already know how I feel about those labels. I don't like them. Great. That's what worked for that person. I'm not knocking that, right? Sometimes I need to be told very directly, this is what you're seeing or thinking. This is how that goes, right? But as a clinician, I don't need to, first, I don't need to use that language. Secondly, I don't need to, I think there's a fine line is what I'm getting at there. So I don't need to be afraid to tell you something, but I also can be mindful of how I say it, right? And so I'm not coddling anybody to the point where I won't say, I don't have to call you an addict or an alcoholic to get the point across that, hey, there might be a problem here. Right. And so this is where I guess being direct helps. So I'm not avoiding anything. I'm stating but if I start calling people alcoholics and addicts the second they walk in, no matter what my gut tells me, no matter what my intakes tell me, they're probably not coming back. Right. They're already nervous. They're already in fear of being judged. Like in a setting, and I know that when I talked about language from the drug czar of 2017, they didn't like the term self-help group. I still call them self-help groups, so I still got a little bit of work to do too, lots of work actually. But they call them mutual aid groups, right? But that's what they are, right? They help each other. They're mutual aid groups. I like that. Actually, it makes sense. In that setting, you follow their norms. It is Alcoholics Anonymous. It is Narcotics Anonymous, after all. If they require you say, hey, I'm an addict, that's their norm, then say that. We get hung up on these little things. Our clients get hung up on these little things. Well, I need to say I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and people don't like that. Just go with the norms of the group. Encourage your clients, right? So long story short is it becomes a okay thing in that setting. In a clinical setting, maybe not as much, right? You want to create that judgment-free zone. I'm not judging you. I'm not labeling you. So just some things. I'm not going to get too much on the labeling system. My point is, let's wrap up this 12-step philosophy. So you have, when we say 12 steps, you're going to come across, and not, next week is the antithesis with smarter, the next paper, not next week. And then the following is another 12-step group. But really, when we can say, when you hear on an average, when you hear a term 12-step, we're referring to AA, NA, CA. Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. There's hundreds of groups, literally hundreds. I think there's a documentary called The Anonymous People from 2012, and even then they said there was 200 and, 30, 40, 50, I forget, two something. Number of groups that either use Anonymous in the title or the 12-step model. I've had a client come see me for caffeine addiction. Yeah, no joke. Came and was already attending Caffeine Anonymous. I didn't know that was a thing, truthfully. There's an Anonymous for everything. There's an Under-Earners Anonymous. There's a Debtors Anonymous. There are that follow the 12-step model because it works in a lot of cases. Again, remember, it's a good model of living. Be a good human, right? Doesn't mean everybody is going to get that. Now, we're talking about co-occurring disorders this week. Keep that in mind here. This is why we can't put everybody in a box, because these programs can be very rigid in that this is what works. And in fact, in one of your papers, you noted that, it says that rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. That's out of the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous. Look, think about that as a client who has a significant trauma background or a legitimate co-occurring disorder of anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or any other number of disorders. What if they're really trying and making the effort and just coming up short as a result of that? If I have a clinical depression disorder, a clinical depressive diagnosis, that's you can't tell someone just get off the couch if you'll feel better. Just go exercise, you'll feel better. Yeah, gee, why didn't I think of that? It's like telling someone with a legitimate anxiety disorder, just calm down, you'll be okay. Really? Thanks for that. No, it doesn't work like that, right? And it affects what we do. Even again, if you take note of the history of these programs, it's very widely documented that Bill W., the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, was taking sedatives and LSD to try to cure depression. So, look, overall, the program is a wonderful support. It is wonderful. It is not clinical, and it is not treatment. While there may be some similarities that cross, look, I use this process in everybody I see, addiction or not. I use a 12-step integrative model, right? Because I believe in the philosophy. Just saying, I do. That's with addiction or not, right? So that said, it doesn't make it for everybody. And so we have to be careful to not fall in that trap. Look, this is what works. So if you're not doing it right, if it's not working for you, then you're resistant in some way, or you're unwilling, or there's a disconnect or something. Maybe there's a co-occurring disorder that's getting in the way. Maybe there's a number of things in my environment that are getting in the way. We can help them work through that and navigate that. So, they talk also about the higher power concept. I noted that from a paper, somebody's paper. And, it's at University of St. Thomas, I'm guessing we all believe in God. And that's wonderful. But what about the clients that don't? Does that mean they're doing it wrong? Does that mean there's no hope for them because you have to find this higher power? No, there's lots of ways around that, right? Until step 2 in their philosophy says, in their step work says, I came to believe in a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Well, how do we come to believe anything? By experience, right? We experience some things and start to make new connections and new thought patterns and new thought processes and ideals. So I doesn't say I have to believe right now, because many people who are living the lives of someone with a significant substance use disorder, a severe substance use disorder, like myself, for example, I believe just in case when I got sober, I felt like, why would God if I'm a child made in God's image, as the Bible says, why would he allow me to live this way? And I struggled with that, as many of your clients will. And it's our job not to push that on them, because we'll push them out of the office and then we're not helping anybody, right? And that was kind of the point I was getting to earlier, is if we start labeling and pushing and doing our agendas, we're going to push them right out. And how is that helpful? We want to be all inclusive. So, I used an acronym. They told me I could use good orderly direction until I found my way. And eventually I started putting some things together that I just couldn't explain anymore. Then I found faith, and then I graduated Liberty University after that. So you do all that, figure out how all that, easy for me to say, figure out how all that works, right? For me, it was God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. That doesn't make that okay for my client. Right now, I graduated an undergrad Christian college called Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee. Been around 100 years. I graduated Liberty University. Now, the only place you see those two things, or at least the Cleveland one, the Lee, is on my LinkedIn. And I had a client's parents look me up on that. I know they were looking because that's the only place you can find that. And she asked me, she said, well, Dan, I noticed that you graduated from Lee University and Liberty University, both Christian universities, yet you don't hang your shingle as a Christian counselor. Why? And I said, well, my faith doesn't change because someone else's doesn't agree, but I don't want to box myself in. My thought is, what about those people that were like me that struggle, that may not be believers, that may not have that same faith? Is it helpful if I hang a sign that says Christian counseling? Now, if that's what I want to do, hang it and be proud of that and look for that clientele. Me, I want to be that barrier. I feel like that's more my calling, to bridge that gap for those that aren't sure or maybe struggling. I don't want to, so you'll find your spot there is all I'm saying, right? So higher power concept is not for everybody, right? You have people who are believers that think it's nonsense. You can't just create this higher power. There's God, right? You have people who don't believe that think it's nonsense that I can just believe in something that I can't see. Everywhere in between, right? So there's a meeting for everybody. There's agnostic meetings. There's a whole chapter in the big book called To the Agnostic. There are Christian 12-step meetings, which we're gonna have a choice to go to one later. The third one we go to, called Celebrate Recovery. It is a Christian 12-step program. They tell you that this is no higher power, this is God. And here's the biblical principles behind each step. And then you have Smart Recovery, which is the antithesis of them all. They don't care about what you believe. If you believe in God, great. If you don't, okay. You don't need to do that to do this work, they believe. We'll talk more about that as we go. But for the right person, 12-step work is wonderful. And I also have down here to talk about their chip system. AA works on, and NA work on a chip and keychain system. Like AA does little aluminum chips, they call them, little medallions. And NA does keychains. Those were super important. They do like a birthday night at the end of the month, every month. Now you can get a chip any day of the week. They have AAs. We'll just talk about theirs. It's a little simpler here. AA has what's called a desired chip, a 24 hours. It's an inward sign of an outward commitment to stay sober 24 hours. The last is anybody need one. First chip you get, I'll take that, right? I'm making an effort here. Then you go in 30-day increments for a year, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Then you get that year chip, man, that's a pretty good one. Then it just goes to 18 months. And then it goes annually after that, 2 years, 3 years, right? Those chips are so important to me because it showed me I was making progress even if I felt I wasn't, right? And this is part of our job as clinicians, is to continue to be strength-based, positive-based, and keep showing our clients, yeah, we're half cheerleader, we're half advocate, we're half clinician. That's a lot of halves, right? We're part lots of parts, I should say. We're part all of those things. And advocate and cheerleader is part of it, right? We want to point out the positive things they're doing and they're making, because they're not always going to see it or feel it. And so those chips and keychains, I know for me and for many others, are valid, and they are helpful to say, I don't feel like I'm doing that great right now, but this chip says I'm doing something I hadn't been able to do in a long time. So I think they're very important and very good. So overall, the 12-step model of living, I try to live by that model today. True story. I've created my own personal attachment with it and how it fits in my life, but I try to live it today. I use it with every one of my clients, addiction or not. So, good model, yes. Does that make it for everyone? No, and that's okay. We can't press a square peg into a round hole and say you have to do this because this is what works. And if you don't do it this way, you're doing it wrong. That's not true, right? And we'll be doing that client a disservice. So just keep that in mind as we wrap up this 12-step model. Look, it's a great model. My hope is that if you went to NA, you go to AA. My hope is if you went to AA, you go to CA. Right? And you at least experience these meetings one time. Everyone should experience Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, the family groups, and everyone should experience ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. Every one of you should experience that and at least know about them because they're very good programs and they can be very helpful. So, as I said this week, co-occurring disorders, chapter 2. As we move on, we talk about treatment settings the following week, and then we go to Smart Recovery meeting. And as we get into the next week or two, I will talk more about Smart Recovery and what that looks like. Guys, great job on your papers. I hope this was an easy week for you with the DB just being a summary. And as always, if I can be of any help with anything, don't hesitate to email me or, just email me and then we'll figure it out from there. Also, if you ever just want to chop it up about this field of study or work or recovery related stuff or, private practice, intervention, SAP or whatever, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to talk to you about this field of work and study. So guys, have a great week and we'll talk soon.